On December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union flag flew over the Kremlin for the last time. Following this historical moment, the Soviet Union disintegrated into 15 separate countries, leaving in its place the Russian Federation. However, when Vladimir Putin, former KGB spy, became head of the Russian Federation, the country started to re-expand its influence over the former Soviet states. This influence led to expansionism and military interventions. Today, Russian expansionism under Vladimir Putin is visible everywhere, from the Caucasus to the Middle East, from the African countries to the Arctic. In this video, we're going to have a quick look at how this happened. Chechnya today is part of the Russian Federation. Before the collapse of the Soviet Union on November 1, 1991, Chechnya had declared its independence. But the Russian Federation under Boris Yeltsin did not recognize it. In 1994, increasing strife resulted in the First Russo-Chechen War. After 2 years, the war ended with the victory of Chechen forces. The Kosovere Accord was signed, so the Russian Federation was compelled to recognize Chechnya officially. Despite the agreement, the conflict was not resolved. Amid these events, a key name, the head of the intelligence department of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, became the country's prime minister. In October 1999, Yeltsin and Putin declared a new war against Chechnya. While the Russian army surrounded Chechnya heavily, Yeltsin made a surprise decision and resigned from his post. With the new millennia, Russia entered into a different era of politics, and Vladimir Putin became the president of the Russian Federation. Under Putin, Russia won the Second Russo-Chechen War. On June 8, 2000, Putin announced that Chechnya had officially become a republic within the Russian Federation, and the Chechens' dream of independence, which they lived for a short while, faded away. 3 years later, in 2003, the Rose Revolution erupted in Georgia. Mikhail Saakashvili, a pro-NATO, pro-Western political figure, became its president. Russia under Putin perceived this as a threat to its foreign policy objectives. In the following years, a conflict broke out in 2008 between the central government of Georgia and its autonomous states, South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Russia saw this as a golden opportunity and pressed the button for intervening in Georgia. On August 7, 2008, a 5-day war broke out between the two countries. Following the war, South Ossetia and Abkhazia unilaterally declared their independence from Georgia. Meanwhile, President Saakashvili resigned and left the country. After the declaration, Russia signed military cooperation agreements with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, so it would have a stronger military hold in the region. Accordingly, Russia established 2 military bases in Abkhazia and deployed around 4,000 soldiers plus the S-300 air defense system on these bases. Moreover, Russia established an additional military base in South Ossetia where it already had 3 other bases, along with deploying around 4,000 soldiers there too. Ukraine's rapprochement with the EU and NATO was perceived as another threat to Russia. In December 2013, pro-Russian president of the Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, ordered the suspension of preparations for the European Union Association agreement between Kiev and Brussels. This ignited anger among pro-European citizens, causing a massive wave of protests against the Yanukovych government. During the Euromaidan protests, more than 100 people died. After this incident, the Ukraine parliament removed Yanukovych from office in February 2014. Shortly after, Oleksandr Turchinov became head of the Ukraine interim government. Putin called this move a coup and declared that if necessary, Russia will intervene with its military power. In this unsteady political atmosphere, Russia annexed the Crimea. An illegal referendum was held in March 2014 that violated international law, but in the end, Russia declared the annexation of Crimea. It was actually Putin who announced that Crimea had become part of the Russian Federation. The international community did not recognize the fait accompli. NATO condemned the so-called referendum, saying that it was held at gunpoint. This was followed by the imposition of EU and US sanctions on Russia. However, Russia began reinstating the Soviet times military bases in Crimea, building new facilities and deploying around 30,000 soldiers. Following the Crimea crisis, pro-Russian citizens in eastern Ukraine started protests against the Ukraine government. In April 2014, they raided government offices and hung Russian flags over the official buildings. Serious clashes broke out between pro-Russian individuals and Ukraine security forces in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. In May 2014, pro-Russian separatists, who are backed by Russia militarily, announced their independence from the Ukraine and also declared the establishment of Novorossiya Confederation, which means New Russia Confederation. According to Ukraine sources, in 2 years Russia sent 6,000 soldiers to eastern Ukraine over a 2-year period. Towards the end of 2018, a new crisis broke out between Moscow and Kiev over the Kerch Strait. Thereafter, Russia deployed S-400 missile defense systems to the Crimea. Ukrainian authorities state that there are now more than 80,000 Russian soldiers at Ukraine's borders and the Russian-annexed Crimean Peninsula. With the storm of the Arab Spring spreading in 2011, protests broke out across Syria against the dictator Bashar al-Assad. Instead of responding to the people's demands, the regime chose to suppress the protests by using disproportionate force against civilians. Clashes turned into a civil war. Towards the end of 2012, a civil airliner which flew to Syria from Moscow was forced to land in Ankara by Turkish jets due to its carrying heavy military equipment. It was the first uncovered event unfolding Russian policy over Syria. In early 2013, rumors that Russia was selling S-300 air defense missiles to the Assad regime caused a crisis in the international arena. Despite Russia's silence, in May 2014, Assad announced that the first batch of the missiles had been received. The US and Germany warned Russia against selling weapons to the Syrian regime, as this would prolong the civil war in Syria. But Russia increased its support step by step. In the meantime, terrorist organizations such as Daesh, al-Nusra, and PKK-YPG were taking advantage of the lack of authority in northern Syria, with the Daesh emerging primarily as a global threat. Thereupon, a global coalition led by the US against Daesh was formed in September 2014. But Russia refused to join the coalition and declared their participation and active involvement in the Syrian war on the side of the Syrian regime against Daesh. After 5 years, Daesh lost power, but this time Russia expanded the definition of terrorist, putting all opposition groups into the same category as Daesh. This was of course done to consolidate its position. With their massive military and diplomatic backing for the Assad regime, Putin's Russia has been gaining countless concessions from the al-Assad regime. A Russian naval base on Tartus on the northern edge of Syria was established. Later, Kamiman Air Base in Latakia came permanently under Russian control. Russia has also been expanding northwards by developing a strategy for the North Pole. By referring to the UN resolutions and territorial waters along its northern borders as early as 2001, Russia claimed to have rights to exercise authority in the region. But the UN did not accept this claim, citing a lack of evidence for Russia's right to such authority. Despite the UN's decision, a Russian submarine planted a flag under the North Pole in 2007. In 2008, Russia shared its Arctic strategy and stated that the region has important potential for Russia's future interests, especially in the field of energy. Due to economic crises in 2008, Russia stopped its research in the area from time to time. In 2015, Russia resumed its efforts and appealed to the United Nations to stake a claim, this time claiming that the Lomonosov mountain range in the Arctic belonged to Russia. Today, Russia has many military bases and research stations at the North Pole and continues its expeditions with an ambition to expand even further. In the last 2 decades, Russia has expanded its range and scope of influence substantially under the rule of Vladimir Putin. Russia intends to continue its unchecked and unbalanced expansion with further cost to the whole world in the years to come.